Hey everyone, I'm Clayfect, and today we are going to start on this tutorial series where I make these Tutootsie creatures out of polymer clay, teaching you guys on how to make them as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, we started with the base that we made in the first episode of this Tutootsies series. So if you want to follow along on this tutorial, then I would highly recommend you go watch that first before you get back here to Lovi and me. I will leave a link down in the description below for you. Now for those of you who has watched it and want to learn how to make little Lovi, let's start out with some cheeks, shall we? As you saw, I rolled up a little ball that I cut in half before I started placing the cheeks. The reason I rolled it into a ball and cut it in half first was simply to make sure that they were somewhat the same size. You're never going to get completely the same size, but you're going to be close. Now we want little Lovi to be happy and in love, which is why we are placing the cheeks pretty high up to make this sort of happy smiling face before we start smoothing out the cheeks. I am using a round rubber shaper tool to smooth out the cheeks because I want a soft smoothing. If I want a harder smoothing, then I would have used the spoon tool. Now it is really from sculpture to sculpture how you want to smooth it out and what type of tool feels best to you. But for me, the soft rubber shaper tool and my fingers are definitely the best way. Now please don't take any of my words out of context, guys. I beg you. So, when we are done with the cheeks, we are starting to work on little Lovi's mouth and nose. So for little Lovi's nose, we are going for a mouse mouth and nose, so to speak. You can also use it if you want to make a bear or anything like that. It really depends on how wide and large you're making it. I simply start by pressing a ball into her face before I started to smooth it out and make it take shape, so to speak. When the snout is smooth to my liking, then I cut up another tiny ball, a little bit tinier than the snout, before I place them on each side of the snout that we have just made. All we have to do now is smoothing those balls into that figure, and we're pretty much halfway with the mouth. The next step is to take a ball stylus or anything of that sort and just poke it in at the bottom of the two balls in order to make this sort of O-shaped mouth. When we have the mouth shape as we want it, we are taking a snake of clay and tracing all around the rim of the mouth before we start blending it in order to make a lip for little Lovi. I decided that I wanted a O-shaped mouth for little Lovi, but you can go wider if you want to. The reason I decided to make it so round is because I want little Lovi to be in love and looks like she's singing her heart out, being so happy and walking on a pink cloud. Next is the nose, which is just a snake of clay that I place on top of the balls before pressing it in, making it sort of like a triangle. With that in place, all we have to do is blend it in before we start poking some holes onto the nose. Now, depending on what kind of creature you want to make, the nostrils are going to be positioned differently, but this is a very good start to any kind of wolf or lion or bear creature or mouse you want to make. Just change the positions a bit, make it a little bit longer or a little bit wider depending on the creature. With Lovi here, I decided to go for the fantasy look. Now for the next step is going to be very, very important. Even though many people doesn't realize it, we are going to make eyelids. Now, eyelids are not only there to sort of shape the eyes, but they are also a very, very important tool when it comes to making an expression. With little Lovi here, we want big bright eyes, but we also want eyes that are sort of squinting because she's smiling or singing. So that is why we are making a snake of clay on the top half, and then we are making a smaller snake of clay at the bottom, simply to open up her eyes, but again making sure that it looks like she is oh so happy. That is also why you can see I'm sort of lifting her lower eyelid up, all in order to make her seem more happy and more in love. Eyelids can be a tricky affair from a beginner. Lord knows I really had my problems with it. But just take your time, and if you keep trying and trying, sooner or later you're going to make something that you are really going to be happy about. When we have placed the small snakes of clay around the eyes as we want them, all we have to do is smooth them, and we're on to the eyebrows. About 80% of all facial expression, in my opinion, comes from the eyebrows, so they are very, very important and very easy to make. All you do is make another snake of clay that's a little bit bigger than the eyelids, and then you place them as you want them. We want to make little Lovi have a set of eyebrows that is very soft and gentle. That is why I'm raising it sort of high up, and also make the inner corners of the eyebrows a little bit more raised, all in order to give her this soft and kind look. With the eyebrows in place, all we have to do is smooth it before we can move on to the next thing, which is the tongue. That is simply a half circle I have shaped with my fingers before I put it into her mouth, and then press in an indent in the middle of the tongue when I place the tongue, simply to both secure it and give the tongue some shape. Now let's make sure that Lovi can hear us, and more importantly can hear her own unique voice when she's singing her lungs out. Here I'm going for some basic round ears that is good for a mouse or maybe even a bear. I take a ball of clay, cut in half again to make sure they are almost equal in size, before I start shaping them into half moons. When the base shape of the ears is to my liking, I'm taking a board stylist and press it inside, making it look like an ear. With the ear shape all done and ready, all we have to do is place them on the head as we want them, before we start smoothing them in. And I'm smoothing them in with my spoon tool, not my rubber shaper tool, simply because I want them to be safe and secure, and in my opinion the spoon tool is a more aggressive friend and will help you a long way in securing your clay. With the ears on, it is time to installing the tail, so to speak, and we do that by very simply pressing some wire into the behind of little Lovi, getting ready to make the tail later on. Then it's on to her feet, where I cut a ball yet again, before I shape them to the feet shape that I want, slightly elongated for these Tutootsies. When the foot shape is as I wanted it, I take my knife and I cut 2 places in the foot to make 3 toes. With the toes cut, I take my slightly curved rubber shaper tool and start pressing it in, shaping the toes more round, dropping the foot in the process, so to speak. You can also just use your hands and sort of pull and round the toes that way, but if you want real thick choppy, small toes, then this is the way to go. When you're happy with your feet, all you have to do is place them as you want them before you start to press and smooth them in. And just like that, we got feet, and it's time for the texture. Now, for little Lovi here, we want a really puffy kind of fur texture. So the first thing we're going to do is create what I call a phantom effect, pressing small lumps all over her body, simply to make it more puffy and natural looking. Now, texture is by far, in my opinion, one of the most boring and time-consuming things about sculpting, but it is also what makes or breaks a sculpture, in my opinion. And the phantom effect really does make the difference. So take your time and make sure that your sculpture is all covered in these small lumps. It looks horrible now, but when we got started on the weird texturing, believe me, it's going to look great. It is also here where you shape the fur, so to speak, meaning if you want some real thick chest hair or real puffy cheeks, it is here that you are placing the lumps, so it will give it that effect. Now, with the little Lovi looking all lumpy and gross looking, it is time to make her look puffy and pretty. And we're doing that by taking our little dentist tool and then begin to scrape the lumps. Now, the only rule about this type of texture is that you should never scrape the same way more than once, meaning that it is important to look so disorganized and just really scratch the clay up. It is a very, very easy texture to make, but it's also very, very difficult because you have to watch your hands. You have to be very careful that you're not touching it after that you have scraped it, because otherwise the fluff is going just to flatten out. This texture is a very, very universal texture, because if you want something that looks like grass, or if you want something that looks like cotton or anything like that, you can use this type of texture. It all depends on what color you decide to go with afterwards. But as I said, watch your fingers, or put it on a lazy Susan if you have one, because you don't want to touch it after you have textured it. You can see my fingers are placed at the top and at the bottom, and it is totally on purpose, and it's going to stay there throughout the whole process of making her. If I have to move her around or maybe put her down, I will grab onto the wire arms there. That is why we have not made the arms yet, and use them simply just not to touch the texture. Think of it as a finger dexterity and precision game that will increasingly get more and more difficult the more texture you are making. But with fluff finally all over little Lovi's body, all we have to do is scrape the top of the head, and now we can only move her around by her arms. But that's not a problem, because after we have scraped the top of the head, it is actually onto the oven. Now, on the Super Sculpting package, they say to bake it for 15 minutes on 130 degrees. That is 275 Fahrenheit, I believe. Now, I prefer to bake on a little lower heat and for a little longer time, simply to make sure that the sculpture is completely baked. And also, I think it helps a bit with it not cracking in the oven. So I bake it for 25 minutes on 120 degrees. That is 248 in Fahrenheit. With Lovi's first bake done and her completely cooled down, because we don't want any micro cracks, All we have to do is giving her a light brush before we start working on the tail. To do that, we are making some small snakes of clay that's going to be our tail. Before we cut the wire, so to see how long we actually want it. I always recommend that you have a little too much wire until you're going to make it, because it's better to have too much than not enough in this case. When the wire is cut as we want it, all we have to do is place the small snakes of clay along the wire and slowly building the tail up from there. With the clay on, all we have to do is smoothing it into place before we start shaping the tail as we want it and smoothing it in the process. Now I'm going for a sort of squirrel like twirly tail thingy, because I thought that would be cute, but you can basically make any kind of tail that way that has long hair. The reason we used long thin snakes of clay here is only just to give that phantom effect that I was talking about, making the hairs look long and twirly, hopefully. The tail does look pretty awful at this point, but that is where you must not lose hope. Just keep smoothing, and at some point it's going to look pretty great. Like so. I just keep smoothing it, and after that I am drawing in the hair, so to speak, with my rubber shaper tools, simply to give that squirrel twirl effect that I was talking about. Now, facial expression is one thing, but if we really want to sell the deal that little Lovi is in love, then we need the body language too. So that is why we are shaping and cutting the wire like we are, so it looks like that Lovi is clutching her hands to her chest, because it's almost like her little heart is going to burst with this emotion. Now, when we have the arms positions almost as we want them, or at least we have a basic idea of it, we are going to cut some clay cylinders like you see me doing here. Before we cut it up halfway through along the side, simply to place it the wire in between, so we can sort of clips and smooth the arm on. When you're making limbs, there's always a lot of smoothing and fitting them in, so to speak. So it will take a lot of time, but just keep going and you're going to hit the result that you want. But with the clay sort of on the arms, it is time to make the hands. And we are actually making the hands exact same way that we made the feet, only in a smaller version. So while you see me making her little grabby hands, this might be a good time to remind you to like, comment and subscribe if you're feeling up to it. It would really help the channel out a lot, and it means so much to me. Also, to all my loyal subscribers out there, hi guys! I am so happy that you're still sticking by me. You guys are the best. Now with little Lovi hands done, all we have to do is stick them to the end of the arm and blend them in. Before we position the arms one final time as we want them. And with the arms finally in place, the next thing to do is simply to bulk out the arms a bit and give her some shoulders. I blended that in so it looked natural before I went on to texture her again, and I textured her pretty much like I textured the rest of her body. And with her arms adequately fluffed up, all we have to do now is give her a bit of details. I'm making her a twirly thingy lock on her head that's made exactly the same way as the tail, only in a different angle, a little bit smaller and without any wire. I secured that little doodad thingy with some bacon bun because her head has already been baked. And with a little doodad thingy in place, all I have to do is squib where my fingers accidentally touch her. And that is pretty much her last bake she's going to have now. which means all she needs is a little bit love from Clayfect. Her tutorial video is going to pop up as the last one in this series, so you have to wait for a little while. But without further ado, there we have her, little Lovi. I have to say I am super happy with her. I wouldn't want her any other way. And I hope you guys like her too. Now the question is, which one is she in love with? My bet is on the orange dude that doesn't know anything. Speaking of not knowing, if you want to learn how to make any other of the Tutootsies, then stay tuned. And why not click on the square to the right? Then you're going to see how to make an angry little dinosaur bird. Little Maddie. But until then guys, bye!